There we go.
Perfect. And then just brief overview. I'm pretty sure everybody here is aware, but the SDGs, again, as a refresher, it's a set of 17 global goals that the United Nations has set for itself and for member nations to achieve by the year 2030. Today, we're going to be focusing on SDG number 10, which, as Greta mentioned, is reduced inequalities. The way that the event is going to go, Greta and I have a short presentation prepared for you all on the global side of SDG number 10. So we're going to give you a brief overview of what SDG 10 is, how it's measured, targets under SDG 10, and then a global overview, and then a bit of a national overview. And then we'll do a quick Q&A if there's any questions. After that, we have Xitlalli with us, who's going to be our speaker to offer up the Marin perspective on SDG 10. And then we can do Q&As if there's any on any of that. And then Felicia is going to just speak a little to us, and then we will wrap up from there. So that's an overview. And then to start off, Bonnie and Ro found a wonderful video for us to watch together, just as an introduction. So we can do that now.
We all deserve to live in a world where everyone is treated equally, regardless of our gender, age, and ethnicity, our religious beliefs, economic status, or where we live. Equality gives everyone access to a level playing field to live the life they dream of living. And we all have a role to play in helping the UN reduce inequalities by the year 2030. Inequality exists among individuals. The richest 1% of people on Earth own half the world's wealth. But what if that wealth was distributed among more people? It would make life better for the bottom 40% of the global population, who subsist on meager incomes and are often discriminated against because they're poor. Inequality also exists among nations. Developed countries like Germany, the largest economy in Europe, are considered to be more influential on the global stage because it has strong trade links with other powerful countries and is a member of powerful international organizations like NATO and Group 20. But what if developing economies like Cyprus had an equal say on issues like monetary policy? Wouldn't a more inclusive global governance benefit more people? Inequality has existed for centuries. Great nations were built on the backs of slaves. Men, women, and children bought in markets by powerful people who considered them commodities, not people. What are the lasting impacts of this kind of inequality? Inequality can be a gender issue when women are paid less than their male co-workers, or a racial issue when ethnic minorities are unfairly targeted by police just because of the color of their skin. What other kinds of inequality have you witnessed? But progress is being made. Companies worldwide are committing to religious equality in the workplace by protecting the rights of Muslim employees to wear the hijab during work hours. In 2017, Ireland became the first country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage by way of a referendum, when 62% of the population voted to amend the constitution, giving same-sex couples equal status under the law as heterosexual couples everywhere in the country. And women in African and Arabic countries are calling for equality in political participation and leadership by holding events like the International Conference on Elected Women, because when everyone is treated equally, we all prosper together.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie. Now we will be moving on to the brief presentation Juwari and I had the chance to create. We'll be going into sort of more of the global side of things. So that is great. Oh, I think it started at the very end. No worries.
Perfect. Thanks, Bonnie. Okay, could you switch to the next slide? We'll start there. Perfect. Okay, so as that video that we just watched mentioned, SDG 10 is the Sustainable Development Goal that's focused on reducing inequality. So that goes for every inequality across the board, from racial discrimination, gender inequalities, discrimination based on race, immigration status, geographic location, etc. So one thing that I did want to mention before we go into more of the details of this presentation, while this this goal is supposed to talk about all these different indicators, the way that this SDG, and I think that this is one of the challenges of SDG 10, it's typically talked about in terms of economic measurements. So even when you do research on SDG 10, you're going to find lots of statistics that are going to tell you about the economic indicators of wage gap and income inequality, whether that be within nations, between different countries, even though we want to be able to take a much more holistic view and take into account all these different indicators that we have been talking about. So when we are going to be going through this presentation, even though the statistics that Greta and I are going to mention are going to be very economically heavy, we do want you to, at the back of your mind, think about who these measures of economic inequality are going to be impacting the most. Policy solutions and any conversations that we have regarding SDG 10 need to be conscious of people who are being excluded from economic security because of their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their nationality, etc. So while on its face, these economic indicators are going to look like just that, we need to look at them as measures of who has how much money, and we need to critically evaluate why certain segments of the population have more than others. And we need to do that by taking into account social, political, historical, and cultural realities on the ground. Next slide, please. So going to why we need an SDG 10. As mentioned, it's going to address inequalities on all fronts, and data from the UN SDG report of 2020 showed that 2 in 10 people around the world have experienced some form of discrimination. So of course, that's going to seep into the opportunities that they're able to find for themselves, and is then by extension going to impact the progress that we make on the global level in every other SDG that that's being focused on. Additionally, identity discrimination leads to a lot of national instability, which causes conflicts, and then that ripples out, especially in our increasingly globalized world, it's going to ripple out into increased global instability, as we're currently seeing with everything that's going on with Russia and Ukraine. We are seeing how that's impacting every nation and is impacting so much on the global scale. There's also issues like the Uyghur genocide in China, the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya that occurred in Myanmar, issues like this. Of course, it leads to things like increased refugee populations and considerations about how to support those populations, where they go. So that creates more and more issues with things that are on another, on like greater levels than just that country by itself. Next slide, please. So these bullet points that you see on the screen, they are the targets of SDG 10. I won't go into all of them in detail, but each SDG essentially has targets that are broken down under them. So these are ways that we can measure different areas that we're trying to tackle SDG 10 through. So for instance, these targets range from wanting to focus on income growth and wanting to be conscious of political and social inclusion, having more efforts to make policy changes that are going to have more equal opportunity for people and more political representation, for especially marginalized groups. One thing to take into consideration, the way I've broken it down on this slide, under each target, I have noted one or two other SDGs. And what that is meant to demonstrate is how SDG 10 is something that's going to impact all the other SDGs as well. So for instance, with the first one, while the target itself is focused on income growth of the bottom 40% of the population, this is also going to play into SDG 1 and SDG 8, which are no poverty, and SDG 8 is decent work and economic growth. So next slide, please. That's also a continuation of the targets, and same thing here. While these targets are talking about things like regulating the global market and increasing representation, having safer migration channels, and more responsible and regular migration channels, these are all going to play into the other goals, such as Goal 16 and Goal 17. Goal 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. Goal 17 is partnership for the goals. And then SDG 11, which is mentioned with the last bullet point, that one plays into sustainable cities and communities. So what we can see through this is that even though these are targets within just SDG 10, these individually are efforts that have an impact on the rest of the SDG framework and the goals that we are trying to accomplish altogether. Next slide, please.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Juaria. So now we'll be moving on to a little bit of some facts where different aspects of SDG 10 are most impacted. As Juaria mentioned, SDG 10 is primarily economic, but we also really want to look at who is being economically impacted, specifically when it comes to women, people of color, low-income people, disabled people, or people who are being judged on their migrant status, as well as religious persecution. So when it comes to gender inequality, the nations that struggle with it most include Yemen, Afghanistan, Niger, Congo, and Liberia. In terms of financial and economic instability, Niger, Burundi, Somalia, Mozambique, and Madagascar struggle most with this. And for overall human rights, North Korea, South Sudan, Syria, and Myanmar are all nations that struggle with that disparity and inequality the most. Moving on to the next slide, please. So in terms of some specific solutions for SDG 10 that have been implemented in the past and sort of things that we can do and more actively work on include development assistance and financial flows, especially in vulnerable areas, following their national plans and programs. So as many of you know, the United Nations cannot officially enforce any laws or any sort of any rules per se on any nations. So we really want to be in accordance and following the national plans and sort of the government systems that are in place in countries that are struggling specifically with SDG 10, and making sure that we're providing the appropriate financial funds from maybe more developed nations. Additionally, one way of economically empowering women is to promote the practice through non-governmental organizations that can build existing skills and teach business acumen around the world. One of the biggest issues when it comes to gender inequality is women having a lack of access to education. Being able to bring in women who have a series of skills and teach them skills can be incredibly successful for the workforce and limiting the wage gap as well. Moving on, we can also integrate historically marginalized or disadvantaged groups in economically active in all spheres of public life. So basically just making sure that we're implementing diversity when we look at who is struggling most in the job market when it comes to sort of, again, that economic aspect. Improving data collection and analysis protocols to help fill gaps in data reporting. This is especially important when we look at statistics about wage gaps and sort of disproportionate economic struggles. We really want to make sure that the information and the data is being correctly marked. Oftentimes corporations will provide faulty data when it comes to who is being paid fairly and not, which is something that we really want to prevent. And lastly, reforming international tax codes and regulations is key to preventing labor force exploitation in countries with a lot of production and sort of making of goods, if you will. Exploitation is a big issue, especially when it comes to the people who are taking these jobs, which are primarily low income, who happen to be women and even sometimes children. Labor force exploitation is incredibly common around the world as we look at China and even India when it comes to producing products such as plastic and even things like big things like the Nike brand and whatnot. So that's a big issue as well that SDG 10 plans to cover from an economic side. Moving on to the next slide, please. So the progress on SDG 10 comes from the sort of big challenge, which is the limited data and data measurements related to economic progress. As I mentioned before, the data oftentimes can get relatively skewed, and the issue is actually sometimes even bigger than we think, not even only in the nations that I mentioned previously, but just around the world and even in the United States. So the global labor income share has reported a downward trend since 2004, essentially saying that workers are receiving a smaller proportion of the output they help produce, according to the UN SDG report of 2020, basically saying that considering the amount of work that people are doing, they're disproportionately getting paid less than what they're working or what they, I guess, quote, deserve to get paid. Among the 84 countries with the available data on sort of their economic and inequalities, the Gini index is disposable income fell by at least 1 point in 38 countries between 2010 and 2017, meaning those countries saw a reduction in inequality. However, income inequality rose over the same period in 25 countries with available data. So as we can see, this issue is still very big. However, there is slight progress being made in certain nations. So there is sort of a bright side and sort of a still starker reality to this issue that needs to be addressed. Next slide.
Perfect. Thanks, Greta. So that was more of the global state of where we stand in relation with SDG 10. As Greta mentioned, there is some progress being made, of course, but there are still points that need to be worked on. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the state of SDG 10 in the US. To begin with, of course, what we've been talking about throughout this presentation, there is the issue of economic inequality that we have within our nation as well. And this is something that has been a point of conversation, especially during these times post the pandemic and just the increasing wage gap that has just been persisting. So the US, unfortunately, actually has the highest level of income inequality in comparison to countries with similar economies. So that is in comparison with other countries in Europe. And if you look at the graph on the left of this slide, that indicates the Gini coefficient for different countries within Europe, and in comparison, there's the US at the very bottom with the highest Gini coefficient that you can see. And just an overview of what the Gini coefficient is, essentially it is a measurement ranging from 0 to 1, where 0 would indicate that there's absolutely no inequality in the amount that people are earning. So everybody is earning exactly the same amount of money. And 1 would be an indication of extremely high inequality, where in theory, like one person is taking away all of the wages and the wealth. So we can see that the US lies somewhere on around the 0.4 scale with this, and it is only increasing, and it is the highest in comparison to all these other countries that are also on that same graph. To put this into more of a statistic, for example, US CEOs, which make up just a tiny percentage of our population, they earn 320 times what a typical worker makes. And this, again, is a gap that's only increasing, where, as we keep hearing, the middle class is only disappearing more and more. And while it is true that some of that disappearance is because people are moving up to a higher class level, it's most likely the case that in most cases people are actually moving down. There's also what we keep hearing about how it's a lot harder now than in comparison to, for example, the 60s, for people to move out of the income bracket that they were born into. So this just shows how stark the economic inequality is and how difficult it is to move out of whatever bracket one might find themselves in. And then this translates a little bit into racial inequality, and racial inequality also is just its own separate topic that, again, as a country, we have been battling with so much, especially these past few years, with more and more conversations coming up. So for some perspective, with statistics, 1 in 13 Black Americans of voting age are disenfranchised, and this is only getting worse with more and more restrictive voting legislation being passed in different states across the country. 8 in 10 Black adults with at least some college experience report having experienced racial discrimination, at least from time to time, including 1 in 6 who say that this happens to them regularly. Something else to keep in mind when we're talking about racial inequality is also how it ties into the conversations we have about economic inequality. The graph on the left, again, shows the average US family wealth by race, where that purple line indicates family wealth of white Americans, and then the pink line shows family wealth of African Americans, and the green line indicates the family wealth of Latino Americans. So this just shows how big the divide is, and just how much more work we have to do in this regard. And as I was mentioning before, and I feel like I've said probably for the 5th time now, even though these are all indicators that are being talked about in a monetary and economic context, we need to really consider why it is that this economic disparity that we're seeing is so strongly correlated with race, and why it is that racial identity is something that so starkly is a dividing factor in this. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, I was supposed to be on this slide while you were talking just now, Juaria.
Yeah, oh, sorry, I didn't see which one you were, but yes, this is the racial inequality. Yeah, so this is the graph I was talking about. Sorry if it hadn't switched before, but this was the purple line in comparison to the green line, and the red line for African American families that I was mentioning. And then we can go to the next one, if everybody's had a chance to look at that. Perfect, thanks, Bonnie. So why should any of this matter? Why should we be talking about all these different measurements? The racial wealth gap is something that is estimated to cost the US economy between $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion between 2019 and 2028. Additionally, the Economic Policy Institute estimates that rising inequality has slowed growth in aggregate demand by 2 to 4 percentage points of GDP each year, which is in the long run going to lead to slower economic growth overall for the entire nation. And just another study to cite, a study by Citigroup estimates that racial discrimination has cost the US $16 trillion in lost GDP as a result of discrimination in higher education access, housing credits, wages, and entrepreneurship. So again, while economic indicators seem to be the most easiest to measure and are the points that we can get the most data on, we really need to be able to look at those and understand what the story behind it is. Why is it that the wage gap is so starkly different? What does that tell us about how easy it is for a young African American individual to access college versus a white American? And what these different indicators can tell us about access point as they move through the rest of their lives. Next one, please.
There we go. Perfect. Okay, so here are some strategies for progress that specifically apply to the United States. We'll start off with tax policy reforms. This basically just means sort of strengthening the middle class and really making sure that equitable wages are being paid. Right now in the United States, we have a big gap between the people who are at sort of the low income scale versus the high income scale. We have people who are making upwards of billions of dollars a year and multimillionaires, which are not a majority of the population. They do make a lot more than the average American. There are still people who are struggling and are paid unfairly and on the risk of homelessness and whatnot. So using tax policy reforms to make sure that everyone is getting taxed equitably is really important. And then specifically moving forward to higher education accessibility, U.S. college tuition for four-year institutions has risen fivefold since 1985 and adjusted for inflation and reaching around $27,000 a year on average in 2017. U.S. children today are less likely to exceed their parents' standard of living because education levels are failing to grow at the rate required to meet the demand for a more educated workforce. Unfortunately, education is becoming less and less accessible for people in terms of sort of the price tag that comes with a university and higher education. So a lot of people end up dropping out or not being able to go in the first place. And oftentimes this will lead to people really just struggling to succeed in life, regardless of maybe perhaps even what their parents make. And then healthcare, apparently the United States is the only wealthy nation without universal healthcare. This is a really big issue as Americans spend more than double on healthcare per person than any other wealthy country on average, which have some form of publicly funded healthcare system. Yet the country lags on many health outcomes such as life expectancy and infant mortality. In 2018, 8.5% of people, or 27.5 million, did not have health insurance at all. This is a really big issue as a lot of the number one form of debt in the United States is also medical debt. So it is really a big issue in terms of who is getting access to healthcare as well as who is able to afford it. We can see that in communities, disproportionately communities of color and specifically African American communities are unable to afford healthcare or even have the highest amount of medical debt, perhaps for even things that are out of their control. And we also want to improve a higher minimum wage. Currently, the U.S. federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour and has dropped almost 30% since 1960 when adjusted for inflation. So again, just making sure that the cost of living is affordable for all places, especially cities, which are typically expensive when we look at California and maybe even specifically San Francisco or Los Angeles. Oftentimes the pay that is made there does not match the cost of living. So that's something that's really important and we hope to raise. And then lastly, affordable housing in cities with more job opportunities, which sort of relates to the last one, but just making sure that for the places that typically do have a lot more job opportunities in cities, that housing is also accessible in that regard, that again, in cities, wage gaps and sort of more disproportionate economic instability is evident. So one of those things that we really want to do specifically in the United States is combat that. And then moving on to the next slide, please.
Perfect. So that actually concludes the substantive or material portion of the presentation. Just the final idea that we want to leave you with is this understanding that views of inequality, as we have been mentioning throughout this presentation, are going to undercut efforts on every other SDG. By their very design, the SDGs, it's a framework that's meant not only to work together, but it's meant for each of the goals to be able to bolster the others. The SDGs are global in nature, so that of course means that we need to be looking at every individual in every corner of the world to see what what their unique struggles are, what background they're coming from, and how that background is something that might be putting them at a disadvantage to be able to access more resources and more opportunities. So if we're not taking seriously these conversations of inequality, then it becomes difficult to really talk about any of the other ones. Like, how are we going to ensure that our cities are sustainable and our political institutions are stable if we're not really reaching the communities that are most often left out of the fold of these conversations? So when focusing on erasing inequalities, we are by default going to be working towards the other SDGs and can have a more comprehensive look at being able to know who is being left out of efforts towards the SDGs and how to really bring them into the fold and to make a more consistent and well-rounded effort reaching the goals as a whole. That wraps up our presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much for watching. We're so glad we got to talk about that, and even more excited that we get to introduce our guest speaker for today, Xitlalli. She was born and raised in Marin County and is a first-generation Latinx woman, and she is currently studying towards a bachelor's degree and completing a coding boot camp, which is very exciting. She also participated in the Marin County Youth Commission in 2020, which is funny because I also happen to be part of the Marin County Youth Commission right now, which is really exciting. And it's great that we both did activism work in high school. And she also did focus on harm reduction and educational outreach on the alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs subcommittee. And she's also recently been on the Marin County External Racial Equity Planning Committee, where she advocated and represented with a focus on housing. And so we're very excited to have a local Bay Area representative coming to speak.
Hello, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. It's finally March 19th. I wanted to share my screen. Will I have that ability just already? Okay. Oh, it's disabled for me right now.
Bonnie, do you know how to enable that? It's under security at the bottom next to participants usually.
You could also make
I made you
Xitlalli
co-host.
co-host.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
made a co-host.
will work.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I'm gonna do it like this. Okay. Oh, this is like not the beginning. Thank you so much for having me today. I hope you can hear me, just making sure this is working. Can you see my screen? Or do you see like my whole screen?
Yeah, we see the whole thing.
Okay, 1 second.
Perfect, we can see the slides now.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. So thank you for having me. My name is Sit-lalli Lechuga. I wanted to begin with a small intro about myself. Oh, I'm getting used to this. I'm sorry. 1 second. Oopsie, sorry. I guess I want this one, but I don't know how to do this one, sorry. Okay. There we go. No, this is, I'm so sorry. Okay. Do you see just the slides right now? Or is it like my browser?
We see the slides, but then I can see like the top bar of it,
Okay.
but it's fine. We can see the slides too.
1 second.
Alternatively, if it's easier, you
Can
can
I
share
send it?
your, yeah, you can send them to me and I can share for you so that you don't have to keep going back and forth.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just sent it to you. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. So again, my name is Xitlalli Lechuga. I grew up in the Bay Area, in Marin. I did move to San Diego when I was younger, so I do think about San Diego too, but I mainly grew up in Marin. I went to San Pedro Elementary, I went to Davidson Middle School, and I went to Centerville High School. I graduated in 2018, and I just love Marin. I mean, am so happy to be here and talk about Marin. Whenever I go out, I'm like, yep, from Marin, and it's my home. So I just very do value being here a lot while I am, because as a student, I think that eventually I will spread out and be somewhere else. I am a first generation student, and I wanted to share just a small quote from the Racial Equity Plan, to kind of start off like the perspective here. Every member of Marin County community deserves to thrive. I truly agree with that, and I truly stand with that. I believe everyone deserves to thrive, including the plants and animals and everything around us. I also wanted to share that through my work with like Marin County Youth Commission, with the External Racial Equity Committee team, I have been able to develop new interests and just like expand my knowledge that I wish to really put into my work in the future. I plan to work with technology, I plan to work with youth, and I really hope that really uplifts my communities around me, because that's like a possibility at first. Just from being from Marin, I didn't really think of it as an opportunity. Technology wasn't really something that I had access to easily, and it was not something that I could really like gain an entry into my schools, since it really required like extra math classes and extra work that for me as just a first generation student and navigating the system, it seemed like a very I was planning to go into psychology and be a psychologist. While that's still an interest, and I still plan to pursue that in the future, I felt like it was very fun to get the opportunity to finally get into technology and try it out, because as we expand, it really creates opportunity for our local governments, for schools, and just everyone. to be able to have access to things. I also wanted to share another quote that I found this week. Activism is rooted in the idea that you can spread knowledge so that change can happen, said by Virgil Abloh. This really speaks to me because I really have focused on knowledge and education growing up. I was very interested in learning about the environment, about myself, about other cultures, because I had found a book and I had seen that things were just so different, and that was just so amazing to me. So yes, thank you. Here's a little more information on some work that I have worked on in Marin. I was on the ATOD Marin subcommittee on the Marin County Youth Commission, where we were able to get some Narcan training so that we could perform other like trainings with other schools or like groups. And we were able to all get like trained on that. We learned about harm reduction as well during that year, and also about reducing smoking among youth, younger adults and youth. I also was on the Marin Against Youth Abuse group, and that is at the Center of Domestic Peace. They work to really focus on teaching younger adults and youth in high schools, and to focus on red flags, to prevent dating abuse, to bring awareness to domestic violence, and to promote healthy relationships. That was a very, very, very changing experience for me as I was growing and I was learning about healthy relationships, and coming from different, like as a Latina, like relationships is something that I had really wanted to stabilize so I could, you know, do all the other things in my life, like go to school and just have a good self-care day. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about self-care, and I learned about healthy relationships, which I promote with others. I support. I love to share resources. I love to share knowledge. And here is the text line that the Center for Domestic Peace has, and you are allowed to text them any questions, get help through there, and they're very supportive. Another project I worked with was the Crushing the Curve campaign. It was like throughout the whole Bay Area, based in San Mateo County, but it was Marin, it was San Francisco, it was Alameda County, and that was a great experience to see other youth from different counties during the pandemic, like through Zoom, and really learn about how we all wanted our voices to be heard, and we all needed certain things, and we wanted to speak up and stand up for this campaign to represent the Bay Area and the people here. So yes, thank you. These are the Sustainable Development Goals. I wanted to share these on this slide because as we are focusing on the Sustainable Development Goal, reduce inequalities, I believe that they all fall together and work together to reduce each other, to work, and they work together to compete these issues we deal with day to day. For example, climate action helps bring better air quality, better water to communities that may not have it. Focusing on each one of them will really change another one. And it was very interesting to see that through the website, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I look forward to seeing them change and see how they change. Okay, so I wanted to continue the rest of my presentation, which will mainly be focusing on the Marin Racial Equity Plan. I wanted to focus on it with three things: land, knowledge, and community. I wanted to start with the land acknowledgement. Here I have two land acknowledgements. I like to share both because both have different languages, and one is from the county and one is from the Spirit Rock community. So I wanted to give both perspectives, and I wanted to share the land acknowledgement statement for Spirit Rock. So I will be reading that out loud. Spirit Rock is located in the San Geronimo Valley of West Marin County, California, on unceded Coast Miwok territory, in an area known as Greater Rancheria. We name the history of the beloved place as a gesture of respect and reparation toward the indigenous residents of the colonized land we now call home. We acknowledge the profound suffering caused by theft and colonization of this land and grieve the ongoing systemic harm to the Miwok culture, as well as to all indigenous cultures of what we now call North America. We honor the Coast Miwok as ancestral stewards of this land, and we are grateful for the contemporary community of Federated Indians of Greater Rancheria, who work to protect the ecosystem of their ancient home and care for Miwok and Southern Pomo people and culture. Marin County has history of the Coast Miwok being here. The first contact with Europeans was with English explorer Sir Francis Drake in 1579. Colonization of the Bay Area began with the Jesuit priest Junipero Serra establishing the mission system in 1769, and the Spanish occupying Alta California as part of Mexico. The missions housed indigenous Californians in near slavery as forced laborers until mission land was broken up into land grants in 1834. Most of West Marin was part of Nicasio land grant given to the Santa Fe Christian Indians, but quickly broken up into private tracts by non-indigenous settlers. Then following the 1848 US conquest of Mexico and the annexation of California, the US pursued a war of extermination against California's indigenous people. The California genocide killed 95% of the state's remaining indigenous people by 1880. So I wanted to share that history because in context of this painful history, the practice of land acknowledgement can be thought as a form of cultural mindfulness, bring awareness and compassion to the present by understanding the conditions we inherit from the past. Land acknowledgements are educational and also have ritual function. They can invoke ancestors, ask forgiveness, offer reparations, and invite a deepening in self-awareness for people descended from settlers. I truthfully stand with this. Growing up in Marin, down the street, I have the Santa Fe Mission, and throughout the years, I have learned a lot of history that I did not learn in school, and I find that very important because this has a long history that brought a lot of suffering people and has caused issues that are now long-lasting in our structural institutions and within ourselves as well. Thank you. Here, I wanted to continue with Marin, the topic of Marin. Here I have a snapshot of the Marin Racial Equity Plan slides. So these slides on here, screenshots, are from the plan originally. Here we have a very nice side of Marin. We have beautiful houses and boats. I also wanted to talk about Marin from my perspective. So Marin, from what I am No, I'm from Santa Fe, and in Santa Fe you have the Canal community about 10 minutes away, and you have the Marin City community about 15 minutes away, and you also have Contempo about 10 minutes away. These communities have dealt with a lot of issues in, for example, having to live in multi family houses with multiple people in there. Personally, I used to live in an apartment with 4 people, including my mother and my sisters, and I had to not have a place to really complete my homework. And I was in elementary, and it was interesting to me because I learned to accept people. Like I was like, everyone has needs, and we all can do this together. But I also didn't realize until later on that this was affecting other youth and other younger children, and may have had a different effect on them, in which could have been not been able to do their homework and not being able to go to school, which I have seen. And sometimes it just, they end up not going to school and end up working. In Marin as well, grocery stores are very limited of choices. You would be paying about $3 to $4 more for a piece of Mexican cheese in the same store 5 minutes away. And like, it's supposed to be like, not, that just doesn't work for me, for example, because I am a youth growing up, gaining a job. I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to budget, I'm trying to try new things to like cook, and it just limits my choices of being able to have a traditional Mexican dish and try to make something new as well, because the prices in food here can be very high, like for like $10 for a box of pasta. And it's as for like food resources, I went once to a community food bank, and it was very difficult to kind of get in there and ask them for stuff because there were so many people. And that's something that I think also has to be looked at. I know that there is food banks, mobile food banks, who go drop off food to seniors and to other groups of people who are getting these resources like mobilely serviced. And I feel like that can be broadened and made more accessible for youth as well. And yes. The main focus here for this picture is that you see Marin, and a lot of people look at Marin and this is what they think. They are not focusing on the schools, they're not focusing on the local neighborhoods. They are just saying Marin is Money County, Marin is big houses, and Marin is somewhere that you will not see a person of color. And that is very shocking to me as I start to like go to the city to take my coding classes, and they kind of are wondering, why am I going to the city to take this free coding camp that was offered for youth when I live in Marin? And I'm like, I don't explain every time, but for me, it's just something astonishing that I can only feel for other youth who are just like, I'm growing up in Marin, and I don't really have this extra knowledge about what the rest of the world looks like. So I can really like say that growing up in Marin, there was a lot of prejudice within everywhere. It was like, you only have a predominantly Latinx school, you have a predominantly white school. And that was very odd because it was just so you could see it from anywhere. You'd be like, why is that one 5 minutes away from that one? And it's totally different demographics. For transportation barriers, you're about waiting for about 30 minutes to an hour for the next bus. And the next bus may not even drop you off near the place you may need to go, which requires myself to get an Uber or pay for lifts. And would literally be like going to work to pay for like a $15 Uber. And I'm like, oh no, like I'm paying for transport, like 30% of my like what I just made is like for transportation. And yeah, thank you. Here we have a vision of, oh, I'm so sorry. Here we have the vision of the Race Equity Planning Committee was to get people from everywhere in Marin to participate in this committee, to be involved, to give their perspective, to share, and to learn as well. I was just a student on the Marin County Youth Commission, and I was hoping to learn more, and I was hoping to use my voice more. And I met someone from the county office who told me, you should apply. And that was a very nice thing to hear. I was like, you know what, I'm learning and this is what I can do. I'm interested in learning more about this. And the whole process of the application was very, very, very short and accessible. All you had to do was fill out a form, answer questions as you could. You were to be sent an application in paper. You could send your application responses through text. You could give a call and give your application responses. And the names were not shown until afterwards. So it was a very like clear, they wanted to be clear that they weren't going to be choosing just specifics. I apologize. Yes. On this board, there was 20 committee members, and I spent a whole year with them learning, talking, and it was very, very eye-opening because I had learned about multiple community members doing different things, and they were all doing it at the same time. There's people working with homeless community. There was people working with people with disabilities. There was people working just for a whole like neighborhood. Just to see the different efforts in the community was very, very warming, because I felt that we could all come together and come up with a great plan with different perspectives. And that was what it was. We were just brainstorming, gaining ideas. So the Marin Racial Equity Action Plan of 2017 was implemented to mainly focus on the offices and the departments, and we were planning to revise that, and now we were going to make this community focused. So here we have the administrator's office, the board of supervisors, the community development agency, the health and human services, human resources, the Marin County Free Library, and the Marin County Parks. They were all set with goals to complete, and they all reached goals like to pretty high percentages. So now then like us, we were supposed to implement a new plan to move forward with, to implement across the whole county. So here is the Marin County Racial Equity Action Plan. It was finalized and presented to the Marin Board of Supervisors on February 8, 2022. It was 3 youth who were selected along with the co-leads to present these three topics, which were going to be mental health, economic, and housing. Here I have one of the development goals, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. To bring back to the point, I wanted to share that everyone holds great knowledge. People have worked hard to establish safe and growing spaces for people. And with that being said, I strongly believe that working together as a county and as a community closely will help us thrive and have our needs met. It would only create a strong communication with our institutions, and the relationship will only get stronger. So to start off, budgets and leading with race. In 2021, in 2020, the budget of $1.7 million from the sheriff's corner office, and along with $5 million from the federal stimulus to support community initiated equity projects and county department initiated equity projects, was brought from the Board of Supervisors, and they were planning to give all this money to the Racial Equity Planning Committee to start the process on implementing a new plan, and that would be continuing through the next couple years. So it would be starting in January 21 to January 22, and we will be the implementation team will be starting about the end of March. So to be leading with race is to look at it through a lens of individual, interpersonal, and systemic, structural and institutional lenses. This is because all these are connected. You start within yourself, and then within your close relationships, and then within things in the places you go every day, and then with among everything that is pretty much set to rule the laws and every day, so the institution. Marin County is among the wealthiest and healthiest counties in the United States. Here I have one of the demographic, like the demos, visualizations from the Race Towns report, which includes the 7 key issues, which is crime and justice, democracy, economic opportunity, health access, healthy built environment, housing, and education. The orange is supposed to tell you that these areas are not succeeding. And Marin education is the best. I would agree. I really think there is a lot of funding and support into education, and along with, they are really hoping to rebuild a lot of our schools and expand them to have a little more opportunities, so more departments. So the median income in Marin is $115,000 with $247. Per capita, the income is $72,466. I wanted to share that along with me sharing that it is the wealthiest and healthiest county in the United States. And I can only rethink about that last slide where we had the first picture of the snapshot of Marin when I think of the medium income household. Leading with race shows an intersectional analysis of all these key areas and how they work together. With having good education, I would be expecting that housing, economic opportunity, health access, healthy environment, and the rest would be high as well. Education is key, and it only shows that Marin isn't really focusing on the other key issues, because I will show you more as we move forward. But oh, 1 second, sorry. Can we go back? This I can see that this has a really big effect on communities and people because they face societal pressures to conform and to ignore and to sometimes leave. Um, there have been people who stand up to a lot of these issues and they are just pushed away, and it just it's something that I think people should be able to stay in Marin and live here if it is their home. There is some unfairness in housing divisions. There's extremely policed areas where there is a higher possibility of being racially profiled, and these are all the same areas in Marin. But yes, thank you. Here is a small overview of the committee and the process. So we developed SMART goals focusing on economic, on mental health and housing. The process started in January 2021, where we were set with with like an overview of what we were going to go over the whole year. We were going to have monthly meetings, and we were going to eventually break up into subcommittees and decide what were the key issues that we were going to prioritize. Thank you. So to start off, I have economic. I have the 3 goals on the screen. The 3 goals are to advance the economic mobility of traditionally marginalized racial, ethnic, and social groups. Goal number 2 was create wealth building and professional networking opportunities for traditionally marginalized and racial, ethnic, and social groups. Goal number 3 was ensure that traditionally marginalized and racial, ethnic, and social groups have equitable access to employment and career development opportunities. I put all the SDGs on here because, like it was mentioned, these are measured economically, and I would like to really focus on these data sets on the bottom. So people earning a living wage by race in Marin County, you have white at the top, and then you have Native American, Asian, the total, and then you have 2 or more races. You have Pacific Islander, Black, Latino, and other. On the next figure, you have the per capita income, which is by total 72,466. These show that the high income of Marin would be predominantly white people, and that the lowest would be Latino per capita. Other race may include different races or more than one. So I believe that this is a very big important factor to focus on, because Marin has a lot of local businesses where you see people who may not have the opportunity to gain or have like minimum wage, and they're not being excluded from this as well. So this number can totally be like not accurate, because not everyone is able to report what they're making and not even making enough. For mental health, goal number 1 is to create and sustain safe spaces that encourage mental health in traditionally marginalized racial, ethnic, and social groups. Goal number 2 is to increase the culturally diverse and relevant mental health resources to traditionally marginalized racial, ethnic, and social groups. Goal number 3 is to increase medical wellness access with traditionally marginalized racial, ethnic, and social groups that are housing insecure or homeless. These 3 goals are mainly focused on bringing non-traditional, like, well, to me, very traditional, but like non-traditional Western mental health resources. So I have focused on bringing ideas such as like in Oakland, they have the Freedom Forwards community clinic, and this is a whole person approach on mental health, and it is a community led, women led, and it is for like you pay as you can, as much as you can pay, and it is free. They give free food. They focus on aromatherapy, they focus on acupuncture, they focus on yoga, and all those things I have never really been exposed to in Marin. And just having to find a community outside of Marin where I can go do that and feel comfortable and that is accepted is very challenging, because I have to pay a bridge. I have to find time in my calendar. And I can only imagine that there's other people who have no access to this and have no opportunity to get this. As well as for people who are housing insecure and homeless, we decided that it would be very important to increase their mental health access as well.
Excuse me, Xitlalli, this is Felicia. I just wanted to break in here for a moment and check with Juaria and Greta about the timing, because I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask you questions and also to ask Juaria and Greta questions.
Okay.
So Juaria and Greta, I just wanted to check with you guys.
Yeah, so right now it's 4:15, which is on the agenda. We are supposed to have the Meet Our Chapter president.
Oh, that's me.
Yes.
But we need to have the Q&A first.
Right. So I don't know, Felicia, do you have an idea of how long your introduction is going to be?
I could take 2 minutes. It would be very short. But Xitlalli, how much longer will you need?
I can wrap it up in like 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. I will be focusing on housing. For housing, goal number 1 is to increase home ownership within traditionally marginalized and racial, ethnic, and social groups. Goal number 2 is to provide financial and technical assistance to home buyers and renters within traditionally marginalized racial, ethnic, and social groups. And by this, we would be hopefully creating opportunity for people to gain financial access, so loan programs and knowledge as well. This would be focusing on these SDGs at the bottom, which would create sustainable cities and communities, help the environment around us, create stronger partnerships. With all these things, focusing again on sustainable cities and communities, it is important to put all these together: the environment, the people, and the land, and hopefully allow people to thrive through their arts, culture, and community. I have a little bit of data here, but I will just quickly highlight that in Marin, the ages that are here are very extreme. You have a majority of older adults living here and a very small population of younger adults, and it is because prices here are very high, and it is very hard for younger people to find cheaper living situations, or students to find living in areas where they can, go to school and maybe, have like a board or dorm. So yes. And then I will be, so for the end of the plan, they are focusing on the implementation and the accountability. They will be setting a new group to focus on the numbers of how they want the percentages to look like for the implementation, and how the implementation is going to look, where they're going to focus, and where the money is exactly going to go. And I put that the SDG 17 because I think it is important for everyone to have a voice in this and to continue to give their opinion and advice, so that this plan can be very successful in the long run. And the next slide is just to again cover partnerships, the SDG partnerships for the goals. I put all of the major Marin organizations that I have seen and learned about that I have found to be very, very important to me. I've gained a lot of knowledge through the Youth Leadership Institute. I'm very grateful for the Marin County Parks for really preserving the parks and the parks that are all around us, like the major parks, like the hiking areas, and as well for young children. I'll have on here the downtown streets team, which is a very great opportunity for people who are homeless and need to find a stable job. They move up. I also have here Center for Domestic Peace, Planned Parenthood, and I also put the Sustainable Development Goals because it is important to use all our knowledge and all our efforts to together strive. The last slide is just I just want to share, and since we were focusing on mental health in the County of Marin, there is a co-branded text line which you can now text Marin to 741741, and it offers 24/7 confidential crisis counseling. And thank you very much. I will let all of us move forward so we can ask questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Xitlalli. It was great to hear about that from Marin's perspective. So if we could all get a round of applause. Great. So now we'll be moving on to questions right off the bat. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask? Any curiosities? Anything? You can just unmute if you'd like.
Xitlalli, I have a question. What kinds of steps are being taken for affordable housing right now?
Yeah, so for affordable housing, there is local or nonprofit organizations such as EH Housing, which provides low income housing and affordable housing for people of different areas. There is also, for the Racial Equity Planning Committee, we were hoping to establish a community land trust, a county community land trust, to really support the financial long efforts of everyone in that community land trust, and as well as setting up just a fund where people can go out and get loans to get a home, and what would be implemented in around June, like 2024, 2025. That is what they're hoping to have done. Yes, there is some housing element, like meetings that people can join to really have a say more on how the land is being planned for or stuff. So there's also that's always ongoing.
Thank you. Okay, I have a question. I am currently on the ATOD committee as well, which is really cool. We just recently did some Narcan training at Archie Williams High School, which is really great. So I was just wondering, how do you plan to because obviously we are well aware that issues of drug use disproportionately affect low income and communities of color. So I was wondering, maybe speaking from experience, how do you maybe plan to help your peers or even people that are in high school right now who may be struggling with substance abuse, and I guess maybe how it relates to Marin County?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So my knowledge from this, from being on the ATOD committee, Marin is very, very, I think the drugs are not really talked about in Marin. And that is a big issue because once you get to San Francisco, drugs are all over and you're just exposed. I think it's very important for youth and younger adults to really learn about the drugs that are out there and really gain full transparency on what the drugs are. Some people may not know the difference with like a prescription drug and a street drug, and that is very dangerous in my opinion, or it is dangerous. I think that bringing more information on harm reduction is important, because there may be people who may be using drugs who are coming in and they're in need of support and resources to gain back their own things. They probably need some other things to be fulfilled, like their basic needs, some housing, some clean clothes, some food, just some place to like have self-care. And I personally think in Marin, we need more youth centers where youth can feel more comfortable with other people around them the same age, and to talk about things, to just understand like these are the reality of things. In San Francisco, where I take my coding camp, I go to this place called the Hype Center, and it is a place that is welcoming to all youth up to ages 26, and you're allowed to go in there and you're able to take a shower, you can have a snack, you can take a nap, you can do your homework. I'm taking a coding camp there, and they are very straightforward with, you cannot just bring all these things in here. We understand you may need these resources, but you cannot bring anything in here. And just like older adults being able to talk to you about stuff like that is just so nice, because you're like, okay, you hear me and I hear you, and I can totally understand this is wrong. And just like really gaining just more knowledge and education around alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Rick, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Rick Lutman. I live in Rohnert Park in Sonoma County. But on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I am their point person on transportation issues in the North Bay. In Marin, you've got a big problem with Highway 37. The problem is, as in any community, there's a need for workers at the low end of the wage spectrum, grocery clerks and teachers and firefighters and so on, and they can't afford to live in Marin for the reasons that you've discussed. So they live in places like Vallejo and American Canyon, and they drive to Marin County on Highway 37 every morning and back again in the evening. Well, there's tremendous congestion on that highway. It's one lane in each direction for 11 miles between Sears Point and the Napa River Bridge. People can spend an hour and a half, 2 hours stuck in traffic there. So this is something that authorities are aware of, but it's something that I think all of you folks in Marin need to participate in. My own bias is for rail, specifically SMART. It's well known that SMART runs from Larkspur up to the Sonoma County Airport with intentions to go on to Windsor, Cloverdale, and Windsor, Healdsburg, and Cloverdale. But they also own the track that goes along Highway 37 and then to Shelville and eventually over to the Napa River, where it connects with other lines. And with not too much time and not too much money, that could be turned into a viable commuter line to provide service in the morning and the evening, especially if done in conjunction with bus service in the lower Napa Valley. So I just wanted to mention this because I think it's a big problem. There's congestion on Highway 101, but people who are willing to take SMART can avoid it. But there's nothing at this point that can be done immediately for Highway 37. Just something for you folks to worry about.
Yes, no, yes. It was discussed in a couple of our meetings that we were hoping to make like housing for workers. So that is something that is hopefully going to be discussed more and be important of, because there is a lot of workers who come here and are taking the bus or may not even have a car, but are just having to take the bus or in the SMART train.
Perfect, thank you. If there aren't any more questions, Felicia, take it away.
Sure, I'll just mention briefly, as mentioned at the beginning, we're the United Nations Association, and we are a membership organization. So there's over 200 chapters across the country. We are one of them here in Marin. If you are not currently a member of United Nations Association, Marin County Chapter, we invite you to join or rejoin. And if you are, I believe it's 25 and younger, it's free. And other than that, I think it's about $50 a year. I think it's 25 for the first year. I'll put the UNA Marin link in the chat. And I will mention sdgmarin.org, a in-process website that lists out some of the resources you've heard today, and also resources from past events and what we hope to be future events, which I will let Greta and Juaria mention. You're also welcome, if you're interested in joining the UNA Marin, we have a local board, and our next meeting is April 16th, from which is a Saturday, I believe, from 3 to 4:30. And we're always looking for new board members who'd like to contribute their skills or gain skills in community organizing and outreach and marketing and, you know, Robert's Rules of Orders and all those things that have to do with running a little local volunteer board. I'll hand it back to you, Juaria and Greta.
Perfect. All right. So thank you so much to our speakers once again, and thank you to everyone for joining us. This recording of this event will be emailed to those who registered. Juaria, if you want to talk about the events coming up.
Yeah, of course. So as we mentioned, these SDG series are something that we put on consistently. So the next event is going to be SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. It is for now tentatively scheduled for Saturday, May 21st from 3 to 4:30. So please mark your calendars. We will be sending out more details as we get closer to the event date. And we look forward to seeing everyone then. Thanks everyone for being here. And I guess if you have any questions, Bonnie, I think you said you might stick around if anyone has questions about membership or anything like that, we're here. But thanks all.
And great job, Juaria, Greta, and Sit-lalli with all your research and in-depth presentation. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good.
Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Marcia.
Great job, Greta.
Thank you.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you, Greta. Thank you, Xitlalli.
Yes, thank you. Have a great evening.
Yeah, good research, good presentation. Ro and Skip, did you want to discuss anything?
And iPhone.
I have a question for Ro.
Welcome, iPhone.
Who's the iPhone? We don't know. iPhone, identify yourself.
iPhone is trying to connect
Ah,
to audio.
connecting to audio.
Okay, well, I guess maybe they're trying to leave anyway.
Yeah.
So
You
I'm
had a
gonna-
question?
Yeah, for Ro Rigney. I put that iPhone person in the waiting room because I think it's just a dribble on. They didn't hang up completely.
I guess.
Okay, hold on a second.
Hold